Guys, welcome back to another video, and in this video we're going to be continuing on with our macOS development with AppKit tutorial series, and in this particular tutorial we are going to be taking a look at how we can send a post request to our third-party API to create new project objects on our server from our applications. So, in the last video, we took a look at how we can use a GET request to retrieve data from a server, but another very important thing you're going to have to do, especially if your application interacts with a third-party in-house service, right? Well, in-house and third-party are kind of different things, but if you use a third-party service that has a third-party, API, to be able to add, remove, update, and retrieve stuff from a database that you create on that service, then you're going to have to know how to do this. Same thing for if you have an in-house API that you use to, as a backend for your app, you will need to know how to do post requests. So let's go ahead and get started by talking about what exactly a post request is. Well, a post request is another kind of HTTP request that semantically means you're creating something, whether it be a new record or a new resource on the server. And you send a post request to a server from a client to tell that server what it should create. In this case, it's going to be project objects in our database, in our API. Now, the way that we create post requests is going to be different than what we did with GET requests. And that's because post requests need a body, and you need to manually set the content type, and you need to manually set the method that we want to use. And we set those on a URL request object. So let's go ahead and go into our network manager and work through that. So in Xcode, I'm inside of our network manager class, and we will create a function called funcCreateProject. That project part is going to be a parameter. So we'll say funcCreateProject. This will be asynchronous, and we want it to be able to throw some kind of error. All right. Now, before we continue, let's go up above our network manager and create a custom error so we can handle any issues during our post request process. So to create a custom error, we need to create an enum that conforms to error. So enum, we'll call this network error, :error. Then we'll have a couple cases here. We'll say case invalid URL, comma, creation failed, and that's all we'll do for now. All right. So inside of our create method, the first thing we want to do is we want to specify the URL that we want to send our request to. And the endpoint that we're going to send a request to here is localhost 8080/API/projects/create. So in our method, we'll say guard let URL equals URL string and inside of this string, it'll be http://localhost:/API/projects/create. Otherwise, we want to throw a network error dot invalid URL. Now, one thing we should also have in our custom error before I forget is we should have a localized description computed property that we can work with later on. We'll say var localized description string switch self case invalid URL return the URL provided is an invalid URL. It's likely that it's not formatted properly. And then case dot creation failed return failed to create a new project, like that. All right, so now that we have our URL, the next thing that we need to do is we need to get a JSON encoder object, and then we need to encode that our project that we get as a parameter to a data object, which when it's sent to the server will be sent as JSON. And then we need to actually send the request to the server, and after that, check the status code to make sure that everything went okay. So let's go ahead and get started by creating our JSON encoder. So let encoder equals JSON encoder, and then we'll say let data equals try encoder dot encode project, like that. After we have encoded our Swift object to a data object that will be sent as JSON, we need to send that request to the server. And we can say let underscore, because we don't want the data we get back, comma, response, because in this case we do want the response object we get back, because we're going to need it to check the status code, equals try await URL session dot shared dot data for request UES est. Okay. Now above where we are reaching out to the server, let's create that URL request. So we'll say var request equals URL request, pass it the URL. Now we need to set the method that we want to use, request.http method equals post. Then we need to set the body for our request, so it'll be request.http body equals data. So it'll be that data we encoded. And then request.setValue. And this method takes in two parameters. The first being the value for the HTTP request header that we're going to specify as the second parameter. So we'll say application/JSON, because we want our server to interpret the request as a JSON request. So that way it'll work properly. And then for the name of our HTTP request header, it's going to be capital C content dash capital T type. Like that. And that is our URL request object. Now that we have our response object, right? We've created our request object. We've sent that off to the server, and when we have our response object, the response is a URL response object. However, that isn't going to contain our status code. We have to cast it to a HTTP URL response. That way we can get access to the status code. Okay, so we can do that by saying if let HTTP response equals response as HTTP URL response. If we were able to successfully cast that, we need to check the status code. Now, if it's anything other than 201, which is the status code for a successful creation of an object on the server, we want to throw creation failed. If HTTP response dot status code is not equal to 201. If that's the case, we want to throw network error dot creation failed, like that. Now, why do we need to check the status code? Well, we need to check the status code because not everything when making a network request is going to cause data, that the data method from URL session to throw an error. Sometimes the error doesn't happen on the client, but only happens on the server. The client-side code might be perfectly fine and works exactly how you expected it to, but the server may not respond correctly if something goes wrong. And in those cases, it will return specific status codes based on what's wrong. For example, if you get a bad request response back, which is HTTP status code 500, you know that the request was bad and something went wrong. So you need to handle that appropriately. You need to let the user know, hey, something went wrong, try this again later, that kind of thing. And For post requests, you should generally expect a 201 status code. And that, like I mentioned, basically says, hey, we were successful in creating a new object or resource on the server. And everything's fine. If it's not, then we know something went wrong, and we should throw an error and let the user know that something went wrong. But now that we're done with our networking code, it's as simple as that. Let's go ahead and actually call this method somewhere so we can create an object. We'll save this. And we are going to go into our main view controller here. In this application, I have a couple things. First, I have a text field for typing the project name in. I have a checkbox for specifying whether or not the project is an active project. And then I have a button for adding that project to and sending that to the server and doing all that. So let's go ahead and inside of that button's action method, we can go ahead and open up a task so we have some kind of asynchronous context to work with. And the first thing that we want to do is we want to make sure that our data is valid. And of course, the only thing here really is we want to make sure that our project name is not empty. So we'll say if, or rather we'll say guard project name field dot string value dot is empty. We want to make sure that it's not empty. And if it is, we simply want to return. We don't want anything to happen. So return. There we go. Now that we have verified that everything is working just fine with the validation, we can say let project equals project, which will take in an ID, name, and whether or not the project is closed. So UUID project name field dot string value, and then is closed will be a project project status toggle. So project status toggle dot state is equal to dot off. Right. So if it's off, right. So if our project is marked as not active, then this will be true. So we know it'll be closed. If it's marked as on, we know it's open. It's active. And then we'll pass this an empty array because on my server, I don't have a separate model or separate DTO model for creating. In most cases you will, but in this case I don't. So on the client, it has to be that way too. And the post request doesn't do anything with the array, so just do an empty array and it'll be fine. I should also point out that the API has been updated, so you can go to the GitHub repo that I have linked in the description of this video and the last video to pull the latest changes. Primarily the changes are that everything has been named more consistently. But other than that, there's no real, like, super major functional changes. Okay, so now that we've created the project that we're going to add to our database, we need to say try await, or rather, do try await network manager dot shared dot create project, like that, and then we'll catch any errors. If an error happens, we will print error localized description. All right. Now, what we'll do here is once that's completed, we know that everything went well by this point. So we'll say self.projects.append project. We will self.projects equals self.projects.sorted $0.name is less than $1.name to make sure that they are sorted by their name in ascending order. All right. And so with that, we can then apply a new snapshot. Apply snapshot. And we should be good to go. So what we've done here, pretty much, is we have first verified that our project name field's string value is not empty. And if it is empty, we simply return. We don't do anything. If it's not, we move on. We then actually send out the request after creating a new project with all the necessary information. If the request was successful, we then append the project to our projects array. After we append the new project, we make sure that our array is sorted by the name of the projects in ascending order, and then we apply a new snapshot to refresh the table. If the request does not succeed, then we don't do anything other than printing the localized description of the error to the console. Now, you could put up an alert here, and in most cases you will, but I'm not going to, just so we can keep it short, sweet, and to the point. Let's go ahead and save this and run our code. All right, successful build. Here we are. we'll say project 3. We'll say this is an active project. Add project. And there's our project. So project 3 is now there. And we can see that it's an active project. Let's call this one another project. We'll make this one active as well, and we'll add that project. And now you can see we have another project in the table, and it is marked as active. Now we can close out of the application and run our code. When it runs again, and we go into our table, you can see our data is in fact persisted. All right, so that's how we can create objects on our server using our using network requests in our macOS applications. Thank you all so very much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.